Hi everyone, it's Jamie Batts, your instructor for Bio 221. It's really cold today, so I got my awesome little Mr. Rogers sweater on, keeping me warm. So we're starting, well, you've been started. I was just waiting for some feedback. Thank you guys so much for the feedback. Chapter 22, and so I'm just going to run through the lymphatics real quick in this video, and then I'll make a couple of videos probably on the immune system. We'll see how the timing goes. I like to make my videos like 10-ish minutes because otherwise it's overwhelming. So the first part of this chapter is about the lymphatic system, and what you need to understand about the lymphatic system, if you haven't started reading it already, hopefully you have, it's basically like a parallel circulatory system. So these vessels run right next to the veins. In fact, they're deep, just like the veins are deep, and they run parallel, and they are one way, which means there's no, like, you know how the circulatory system has the pump for the heart and everything's going out and then coming back in. Well, the lymphatic system is kind of like a one-way vacuum system. That's how I think of it. So remember all that excess stuff that was filtered out at the capillaries and then it was not reabsorbed on the venous side of the capillary, it was just kind of left there for the lymphatics? Well, now we're going to learn about what happens to that. The lymphatics are basically one-way little suction cups that are sitting down in the tissues, and you know they have this closed kind of one-way valve system, kind of like the semilunar valves are one way, and the valves in the veins are one way. So they're kind of closed with these little flaps, and then the stuff gets sucked into them just like a little vacuum, and it goes up the lymphatics, up, you know, from all the distal tissues of the body, and then it's all actually going back to the heart. In fact, all the lymphatics converge into larger vessels, and eventually dump right back into the brachycephalic veins, and then dump right back into the heart. So that's the basics of how the lymphatic system works. You can see the diagram on page 771 showing you where all the lymphatics are and the valves that I was talking about. So there are one-way valves, and the lymphatics, the vessels, are very loose. They're not rigid. They don't have like the three tunics, just like the circulatory system had. They're very much just a thin layer of tissues, just all meant to push the lymphatic fluid back up to the heart. So then you ask, well, how does it move? You know, if there's no pump driving it, how does it get from the toes all the way back up to the heart? The same way the venous return happens. So all the lymphatics are driven by skeletal muscle contraction, one-way valves, and a little bit of the respiratory pump once it gets back into the thoracic cavity. So it's just kind of squeezed along, which is why when you're sitting for a long period of time, sometimes you get swollen just from sitting, and you know, on the airplane they always say to do like calf muscle stretches, or you know, kind of go up and down on your toes when you're sitting in your seat. I'm doing that right now as I'm telling you that. That's going to squeeze your calf muscle to get that lymph kind of squeezing back up to the heart. So just a suggestion of how to think of that. Then on page 772, you can see those actual ducts going back into the heart, right over here, right? And there's actually two. There's two main, they're called ducts. The two main ducts that, there's my coffee, go into the heart are, one's called the right lymphatic duct and one's called the thoracic duct. So the right lymphatic duct is draining the fluid from just that right corner of the body, like the right arm and the right thoracic area. You see that diagram of that lady there, letter C on 772. That's what the right lymphatic duct does. The thoracic duct does everything else. And so that's the legs, the abdomen, etc., are all drained and returned back on the left side of the body. So then we get into the lymphatic tissues and the lymphatic nodules, and the lymph nodes. So the lymph nodes have a structure that we're going to see repeated several times this semester. So they have an outer layer called a cortex, or a capsule rather, and then a meaty layer called the cortex, and then an inner layer called the medulla. I think of these structures like a lymph node, or like we'll see in the spleen or in the kidneys, for instance, later on. I think of them as kind of like apples, right? That outer capsule is like the skin, and then the meat of the apple is like the cortex, and then that inner part where the seeds are is kind of like the medulla. It's kind of like that. So you see the picture. I am always a proponent of drawing. These are my notes from when I first read the chapter, oh gosh, 10 years ago. But I drew the lymph node, and I labeled everything so that I can understand exactly what it is and how it works. So, you know, I have all of the arrows going in for our afferent vessels, and then there's only one efferent vessel where everything leaves. And that's the major point here, because the idea behind the lymphatic system is it's slow, right? Because where we're draining, we're pulling all the excess stuff back into the blood, but the function of the lymph node is to filter, and what I call dipstick. They kind of check it to make sure there's no pathogens in it, and if there are pathogens in the blood or in this extra interstitial fluid that's been picked up, that's when the whole immune system response will kick in. So the flow of blood into the lymph node, it comes in at various afferent vessels, but then there's only one efferent vessel taking it out. So it's very, very, very slow to go through the cortex. It's kind of like a traffic jam. All of these small little pathways through the lymph node are there to filter and dipstick, basically check in with the interstitial fluid and make sure that it's in balance, make sure that there's no pathogens or invaders, so to speak, in the lymph fluid. And then you can see the actual cross-section of the tissue there on 775. That's important also. On 776, we're looking at the structure of the spleen, and again, you'll see this the same exact kind of formula for the organ here. You have the outer capsule, inner cortex, inner medulla, and with the spleen you have what's called red pulp and white pulp, and that's where different blood cells are going to accumulate and aggregate. And of course we know one of the major functions of the spleen is for the red blood cell graveyard, and that's what you'll kind of see as you understand the function of the spleen. They're pretty straightforward. Same thing, function of the thymus, pretty straightforward. No kind of hidden tricks about the lymphatic system, just making sure you understand the flow of lymph through the body and through the lymph nodes themselves. So page 779 gives you a nice overview of the lymphatic system, and it compares it to the circulatory system. I really like this diagram here. This is the one I'm talking about. That diagram does a great job of showing you kind of the parallel nature of the circulatory system and the lymphatic system, and it pinpoints all of the different lymphatic tissues throughout the body. So I think that is a good one to pay attention to. And it also starts to include some of the special types of cells, like the T cells and B cells that we're getting ready to talk about when we talk about the immune system. So that is the lymphatic system in a nutshell. Now we're going to move on to the immune system in my next video. See ya.